Okay, let me turn this down here. It's been more than a year since the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law, and a new survey revealed that the majority of Americans are unaware of the opportunities available to them to transition to cleaner energy. We hope to clear that up tonight. So with that, help me welcome our speaker, Lance Hovland.
Good evening, everybody. So this evening, I'm going to be going over different aspects of the IRA, and then I'm going to give a focused presentation more so on the Rural Energy for America program, which small businesses and agriculture producers can access funds. And then we will go through we'll have some time for questions. So like I said, about me, IRA and REAP, applying, more incentives, and then questions. So about me. So all of us have different ways that we've got into sustainability. And so my sustainability origin stories happened when I was about 8 years old. I was growing up in Iowa at the end of my street in suburbia, at the edge of it, right? At the end of my street, there were cornfields, and right behind my house, there was a hill with that was a prairie land, right? And so there was a lot of milkweed there, and there were tons of monarchs that would come through as a child. And so, as a child, I thought this was pretty cool, but I also thought it was pretty normal. So when the bulldozers started working their magic and making a new development, I thought that was pretty cool too. Me and my friends would go up and play in the area that they were digging out and in the concrete structures for the new homes. But at the end of that process, there were no milkweeds left and there was no prairie left. And so that next summer, there were no monarchs. And so that's kind of when it first started hitting me that, we share this earth with everything on it, and what we do as humans affects the world around us. And so fast forward to a few, as I'm moving through life, I'm making more sustainable choices with my life. I end up teaching at Hudson High School and running a sustainability club there. I'm involved with Hope for Creation, which is a sustainability grassroots organization in River Falls. And kind of at that point, just last year, I was like, I just don't want to have sustainability be my thing that I do in my spare time. I want it to be my full-time job. And so now I work for Energy Concepts, which is a solar installation company here in Hudson, up on the hill. But that said, I don't want to make it seem like I'm just pushing solar, because I'm not. As part of my job, I have to look at all the solar incentives that are out there for, federal programs. But what I found out through doing all that research is that the IRA and the Rural Energy for America program apply to lots of different things. It applies to wind, geothermal, et cetera. We'll go over that. And so I want to point out that I'm here as a person who cares, and I want to share this information with everybody as much as I can. And it's not just about solar. I also do want to point out that I am not a REAP or an IRA or a government representative, so I cannot officially give you information based off of the government. But I have spent a lot of time reading governmental papers, and so I'm a concerned citizen that wants to help out. All right, so with that, we're going to go to our IRA plus and our REAP overview. You can go ahead. Yes, I'll try and speak closer, thanks. All right, so a lot of people want to go to renewable energy because it makes good business long-term sense, right? You stop paying for electricity, you save a lot of money in the long term. However, there are still these economic hurdles to getting into solar or wind. And so we might be those people on the left there seeing this pile of money in between us and our renewables. And so what the IRA really aimed to do was to lower those hurdles so that, you know, small businesses and agricultural producers especially can access more funding. Okay. So the Inflation Reduction Act is aiming to lower these economic hurdles for everyone. And they have committed, the federal government has committed to a total of $669 billion of investment into clean energy over the next 10 years, which that 10 years started at 2022. So, you know, until 2032, they are planning on investing this $369 billion. Okay. Now, in the IRA, there are 119 programs that disperse all of this money. So it's going to take a lot, and it takes an informed citizen to access all of this funding. And so part of what I'm trying to do is let people know that this is something that you need to look at. Here's how you access the funds, right? And so hopefully through this presentation, you'll see probably the area or the one program called REAP, which is what I find the most exciting program. However, each one of these 119 programs deserves their own presentation. Okay, and so in the end, part of this is going to be on citizens to be informed. Unfortunately, there's not people out there telling you, hey, let's access these programs. Okay, unfortunately, us as citizens have to read up on some of that, and the link in the slideshow, the IRA guidebook, is a good place to start for that. Okay, so these different IRA programs, the funds are accessed through different levels, right? So sometimes the program is aimed at the state level. Sometimes it is aimed at the utility level. Sometimes it's aimed at a tribal or a citizen level or a small business level. Okay, so each one of these programs, you kind of have to look into which level of access there is. Okay, so again, as citizens, we have to talk to our local representatives and ask them, hey, I've heard about this program. For instance, the Clean Heavy-Duty Vehicles program. How are you accessing that program? Are you converting the heavy-duty vehicles in our municipality to clean energy through the grant funding on this? Okay, so you might have to do some contacting of your local representatives in order to get this. There are also two of the ones on this slide, in particular, the Climate Planning Pollution Reduction Grant for Implementation and Planning. Okay, this is directly funding for states and municipalities to plan for climate change, basically. So how are you going to mitigate the effects of climate change in your community? Okay, so those are two that I would highlight that you should definitely talk to your local governments about. Let's see, a few of the other ones, the home energy rebates, you can get those on an individual basis. There are some that are available on a contractor basis, okay? So again, these are things that depending on where you're at, you're going to have to contact different people in order to get there. All right. There are also tax benefits that are available through the IRA. So the other slides were based off of programs where you can apply for grant money and get direct money in your pocket, right? These other programs are through tax incentives and deductions and credits. Okay, so there the ones that are listed up here are available for small businesses. Well, businesses in general, not just small businesses. But there are some that are available for individuals as well. So, for instance, let's see here. Let's move on to the next one, actually. That's a good one for individuals. Okay, so the top two on the next one here are incentives for clean vehicles, electric vehicles, basically. And so those apply to businesses as well as citizens as well. Okay. So those are all excellent programs, and they all deserve their own presentation. However, the one that I am most excited about is the program called REAP. It's the Renewable Energy for America program. Okay, this program allows for grants and loan guarantees for rural small businesses and ag producers for renewable energy programs, as well as energy efficiency improvements. Okay, and so the renewable energy program projects get up to 50% of the cost of their system, whereas energy efficiency programs or improvements get up to 25% of that cost. Now, also for agricultural producers, you can get guaranteed loans up to 75% of the cost of the system. So that begs the question, what are renewable energy systems? So renewable energy systems are solar and wind, but they are also geothermal systems, hydrogen systems, biomass systems. Okay, all of these systems you can apply for a grant that's up to 50% of the cost of the system. Okay, so energy efficiency improvements are things like improved HVAC. They are also things like improving your insulation, lighting, doors, windows. And the thing that I found really interesting, because I haven't been into farming for a while, but you can convert your irrigation system from a diesel generator to an electric generator, and that qualifies as well. And so there are some very specific things that can be done, but in general, the ones that I've put up here are the most popular. So the solar and wind on the first slide, and then the HVAC and the insulation, and actually the lighting are probably the three most in terms of the renewable energy systems. Okay. In addition to these grants, you can also get loan guarantees if you are an ag producer up to 75% of the cost. So, in general, how do you qualify for these grants that are worth a lot of money, you know? So 50% of the cost of a renewable system is pretty amazing, right? And so in order to qualify for that, to be a rural small business, you have to be in a populated area under 50,000, okay? So basically, all of western Wisconsin until you get to Eau Claire is a rural area. So all the small businesses in Hudson and all the small businesses in River Falls and Prescott and New Richmond all qualify for this program. Okay. However, if you're in an area that I haven't mentioned, there is a link and you can go online and find that area. Okay. If you're a farmer, you do have to make sure that 50% of your electricity is coming from, or 50% of your electricity is going to the actual farming aspect of your business, right? Okay. And even in a small business, say you run a business out of your home, that gets a little tricky because you need to make sure that 50% of your electricity that is going to that home is going to the actual operations of your business, okay? Another thing that might be a little tricky for small businesses is that you have to own and control the system. And so sometimes, for instance, if you're a small business and you are renting the property, the owner of the property might have to apply for the grant. And then you would hopefully get the benefits for that because you are spending on the electric bill, okay? But you have to work with the owner of the property in order to make sure that that happens. And one thing that's really great about this is that the state representative for Wisconsin and Minnesota both, but especially Wisconsin, I've talked to her, Judy Clendenning. She is awesome. She'll get back to you right away. She'd love to talk to you on the phone before you go through the whole process. And she really wants to get this money out there to people. And so she's a really great resource, which I'll have later on. So another thing that we do have to worry a little bit about is that there is an environmental review for all of these grants, right? And so that said, the main thing is that they just don't want to, they want to make sure that it's not imposing on, say, like a wetland or a farm or a forested area. And so in order to make sure that that happens, they do an environmental review. That said, they might just come back and tell you, hey, you just need to move your system back about 10 feet and then you'll be okay. Okay, so they do want to make sure that this happens, but they will also want to make sure that it's not impacting the environment negatively as well. And so it's a small hurdle, but it is one that is going to happen for each and every application process. All right, so once you've decided, hey, I want to get some renewable energy on my property, or I want to make some energy efficiency improvements. You do have to apply for this. This is a competitive program. The tough part is that we only have 4 windows left, okay, before the end of 2024. Okay, once we get to 2025, depending on the political climate, the incentives may be renewed, they may not be renewed. And so we don't know that for sure. And so really, right now is the best time for small businesses and agricultural producers to access these funds because we're not sure if they're coming back. Okay? So, that's okay. So as I mentioned, these are really helpful contacts. Judy is awesome. I've spoken to her on the phone several times because initially when I saw this information that you could get 50% of your system paid for, I thought that this might even be a hoax, you know? And so upon talking to her, no, it's real, and it is combinable with other incentives, and so we'll go over that later, but you can get even more of your system paid for than just the 50%, which is really amazing. And then Ron, I've contacted him through email several times. He's also very good, gets back to you within 24 hours. So once you've decided that you want to apply for one of these grants, okay. First of all, you need to make sure that you are eligible to receive the grant, right? And so there is a map of rural areas, but like I said, pretty much all of western Wisconsin is considered a rural area, okay? And if you're a small business, there is a table of sizes that, you know, you can't be greater than this amount in order to apply for this. So the 2 limits on what is considered a small business is there's a monetary limit on how much profit you make, and then there is a number of employees that you have. So for instance, a brewery like Hop and Barrel, they cannot have more than 1,250 employees in order to be considered a small business. They probably qualify, right? Grocery stores, they cannot do more than $40 million of business in a year. So I don't know how County Market does, but I'm anticipating that they also would be considered a small business, right? And so pretty much I would say 95%, just on my gut, 95% of the businesses in Hudson and River Falls and really anywhere around here, we would be considered small businesses and can apply for these grants. Okay. Government does not qualify. So part of the IRA is that this spurred from kind of COVID, right? And so small businesses were hit pretty hard and went under. And so they were trying to get more funding for small businesses, right? So government agencies do not count in this particular program. Nonprofits also do not qualify for these programs, for the REAP program. So. Yes. So depending on the program, you might be able to access different parts of it. So there are parts of the IRA that nonprofits will be able to access, right? But not every program, and the REAP program is not one of those that they apply to, right? All right, so the second thing you need to do, there is a government site that basically keeps track of how many people are getting grants. It's called the SAM program, okay? And so you need to register in there and make sure that that's up to date before you apply. And then the third thing is that you can actually start completing your application. Again, I would contact your state representative just to make sure that everything's kosher, right? At this point, you are probably going to want to start talking to a contractor. Who's going to install your wind, geothermal, or solar system? Who is going to do your insulation upgrade, right? So that you can get the technical information and the cost information so that you can apply. The other thing you need to do is start talking to your utility, because you also need to find out how much energy are you using and how much energy are you going to offset by implementing these programs. Okay? At this point, you also might want to start talking to a grant writer. They can be very helpful in making sure that you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's before you send in that application. Then, once you finish, do not start your program until they get back to you. You know, that environmental review that I talked about, there have been incidences where the program would have funded a project. However, they were within 10 feet of a wetland, and they said, if you would just move it back 10 feet, we can approve your program, right? But since they started building it within that 10 feet, they can no longer approve that funding. And so you should wait. Don't start your project until that happens, okay? The main thing that Judy really wanted me to impress on people was include details in your application. Okay? The more details that you have, the less questions they have to ask. Okay? The less time you have to spend finding answers to questions. You find them up front, and it speeds up the processing time for all of these applications. Okay? So that's the main thing. Include details. Be as detailed as possible. All right. So as I mentioned, this is a competitive program, okay? So those windows that we were talking about, they accumulate all of those files, all those applications within that window, and then they start scoring them, and then they start reordering them and put the highest scoring on the top of their pile, and then they start giving out money to the people on the top and work their way down, okay? And so at a certain point, Wisconsin or Minnesota is going to run out of money. And that's where they cut off, you know, how much they give. But at the bottom of that pile, you know, if they only have $10,000 left and say you applied for $20,000, they'd call you up and say, hey, we still have this $10,000 left. Do you want that money or not? Okay, and so they might grant you half of your money, right? Okay. There's also cases where other states do not use all of their money within an application period. And so even though you may be on the bottom of the pile, if, say, Wyoming doesn't get enough applicants, that money gets dispersed throughout the rest of the states, and then the other states can start giving out some of that money as well. Okay? And then the other thing that I want to point out is just because you don't get the money within one application period doesn't mean that you won't be approved in the next one, because there may be different amounts of people who have applied. The people who applied in the second period might be scoring not as well as you do. Okay, so it's always good if you don't get a grant within one application period, you should apply for another grant. Okay, it's scored on a 100-point program. The environmental benefits are 10 points. Okay, 5 points are awarded for not producing any greenhouse gases, and then 1 point each for all of the other ones up there. So you do not convert farmland. So if you're a small business in urban setting like we are, like right here, you'd get an extra bonus point for that. Okay. Does not contribute to deforestation. Again, if you are in the city, you're not going to be contributing to that, so you're going to get a point. Okay. If you improve water conservation, that can help too. That's a little more difficult with solar and wind. It doesn't always help, but you can design a system that does help more. So it depends on your system design. Meets a renewable fuel standard. So if you are putting in a wind, solar, geothermal, you're going to meet that standard because you are going to be producing all your energy on that site. Okay. And then there are biomass implications as well. In terms of the quantity generated, replaced or saved, so they measure this by BTUs, so those are thermal units of energy, right, that you are offsetting. So if you offset, or I should say, the higher amount of BTUs you are offsetting at a lower price, the better your score. So if you can negotiate with your contractor to kind of lower the price a little bit compared to how much energy you're offsetting, you're going to get a better score on that one. Yeah. The second part of that is you get 15 points per energy replacement. So if you're able to offset all of your energy generation or energy needs, you're going to get those 15 points, right? But if you're only offsetting maybe 50% of your needs, you're only going to get 7.5 points, right? So the commitment of funds is really just saying, okay, if you get this grant for 50% of your project, are you going to have that other 50% available to you? So they do look into your bank account and make sure that you have the funds available. Okay? Previous grantees, if you've gotten a grant before, you're not going to, especially within the last year, you're not going to get points for that. If you've never gotten a grant, you'll get the full amount of points. If you've got a grant but it was 10 years ago, then you'll get partial points for that one. Okay? Disadvantaged, distressed communities. Unfortunately, to tell you, Hudson is pretty much not a disadvantaged or a distressed community in terms of the government. So, but there are areas, so if you know people like, for instance, up north, up north is considered a disadvantaged area. And so there are portions of northern Wisconsin that would qualify for that. Yep. The simple payback is, okay, you've put in your system. How long is it going to take you to make back that money that you put into that? Okay, and so, for instance, because I know solar the best, a solar example, a typical solar without any incentives is going to be about 8 years. Okay, with these incentives, it brings it down to less than 1 year if you apply all these different incentives that I'll talk about. But even if you don't apply all of them, it can still be as low as 3 to 4 years. Okay? So you get, if it's less than 10 years, you get that 15 points, which is great. And then at the end, there is the person who is looking at all of these applications. They have some discretion to say, okay, I've already awarded 2 or 3 grants in Hudson, and I haven't awarded anything down near Madison. So I'm going to give them Madison an extra point on this one. So there is a little bit of discretion there. So like I said, there are additional incentives for all of these things. So one thing you always want to do is look at the 3 levels that they're going to be applied at. They're going to be applied at the federal level, the state level, and the local utility level when we're talking about renewable energy. Okay, so in Wisconsin, we have Focus on Energy is at the state level. On the federal level, we have all of these programs that I've just been talking about, as well as the tax incentives, which I'll talk about a little bit more again. At the state level, there's also PACE financing, which is loans that can provide you more of the upfront costs. Okay. And then at the utility level, lots of them have different, it varies by every single utility. So you're going to have different incentives based off of every utility. So just a few examples. On the federal level, in addition to these grant programs, you can get your investment tax credit. And so that's 30% of your system. So if you're residential or businesses, you can apply for a 30% tax credit. Now, a tax credit lowers the amount that you owe and increases your refund level, right? So that a tax credit is really money in your pocket. So 30% of the system, whatever that is, if it's a $100,000 system, that's $30,000 that you get back, okay? So if you already just, in addition to the REAP grant, which is 50%, and then the federal ITC is 30%, that's already 80% of your system is paid for, which is, again, it blew my mind. I had to check to make sure that this was actually legal and we weren't doing anything wrong here, but that is the fact. The government will let you double dip with that. Okay. Focus on Energy. That is for the state of Wisconsin. They will pay up to $50,000 for a solar installation for businesses and $60,000 for an ag producer. Okay. So now we're getting beyond that 80% of the cost. Okay. If you're in River Falls, where I live, you also get an additional $5,000. If you're in Excel, they will provide you 50 cents per watt moving forward. So usually we measure these in kilowatts. And so, a 1 kilowatt system is $500, right? So, and then MACRIS, which is really complicated, but if you're a small business, you might understand depreciation. And so if you are you're allowed to depreciate the value of any investment that you make. So this doesn't just apply to renewable system. This applies to the building that we're in right now. But if you buy a new renewable energy system, you can depreciate the value in terms of a deduction. So that lowers your tax liability for the year. So even though it's not directly money in your pocket, it does lower the cost, essentially, based off of your tax bracket. Okay. In the middle there, I have a link to a database that the federal government actually links to. It's based out of South Carolina. But it's so good that the federal government is like, we don't want to reproduce this. We're just going to direct people who are interested in this to this website. So you should look at the database for energy incentives that is linked through this slide. Because as of right now, Focus on Energy is debating what they're going to apply their funds to this year. So I'm hoping that we're going to have clarification on that by January or February. But I can't tell you that right now. So going on these websites will help you find that information. All right. So the federal tax credit, I went over that, right? It's actually money in your pocket. Okay. So it's different than a deduction. So it lowers what you owe to the government, and it increases your refund. Okay, so this goes to the ITC can go to individuals as well as businesses. Okay. So depreciation is something that's only available to businesses, and like I said, you're allowed to depreciate the value of your investment. You're allowed to depreciate the entire value of that, though. Okay, so there are different ways you can do that. Section 179 allows you to depreciate all of the value of that system in 1 year. Okay, so what that means is if you have a $100,000 system that you're putting in, the first year when you're filing your taxes, you can depreciate all that money, and if you owe $100,000 in taxes, or if you have $100,000 or more in income, of taxable income, yes, it'll bring that down. And so what that does is then you have to kind of multiply that by your tax rate that you're paying in order to find out how much money in your pocket that really is, right? So that is the federal tax rate for businesses is 21.8%. So if you have a $100,000 system, you're essentially getting $21,800 back. Okay. You can also use a different system called bonus depreciation, in which you can designate a certain amount. For instance, if you don't have enough taxable income to make it worth it to depreciate all of the value of the system in 1 year, say you only have $60,000 of taxable income and you had a $100,000 system, you could designate $60,000 to come out in that first year. Okay, so then you only have $40,000 left, and that $40,000 left would be spread out over the next 5 years. Okay, or if you have 0%, if you have zero taxable income for the year, you could just decide to depreciate the value of that system over the next 5 years. Okay, and so there are tables involved with that, and so it's going to vary by year. That is something that you definitely want to talk to your accountants about in order to access that money, but it is something that people should be talking to their accountants about when they're small businesses and they are making a large investment. Okay. So, again, this applies to wind and geothermal and all other energy systems. However, since I know solar the best, I'm going to just use a solar example. Okay? So, if we have, what was the size of the system? Oh, 25 kW system. Okay, so that's going to produce enough energy to offset about 30,000 kilowatt hours for a business, which is pretty big. You're right. Yeah, and that's going to cost roughly $75,000. I can't guarantee that, but that's a ballpark estimate, right? So if you apply for the REAP grant and you get it, that's 50% of that cost, right? So that's $37,500 right off the bat. Okay. Then if you use the federal ITC, you get 30% of off of that. Okay. So that's another $21,100. What was that? $412.50. Okay. And then if you use the state incentive of Focus on Energy, they'll give you $3,625 for that system. So that all that leaves for you is $12,000 that you have to spend on your system. Okay? Now, that's only 16.6% of your costs of your system, which is incredible, right? This is like, why wouldn't you do this, right? And so that's why I want to share all of this information, because there is a tremendous amount of money, and once you install your renewable energy system, whether it's wind, geothermal, or solar, or anything else, you're going to be then saving money in perpetuity, right? Sure. Sure. So if you're using about 30,000 kilowatt hours per year, okay? So what that would be, that's about 1/3 of 100,000, and so that's about, let's say you're spending $5,000 on electricity per year. That's what that would amount to. And so you're going to be saving $5,000 every single year that you have this renewable energy system. And you have to keep in mind that electricity is going to go up in costs. And so what you're really doing is you are buying electricity at a fixed cost right now in 2023 dollars rather than $2050, which are going to be a lot more expensive. Yeah, so I can't specifically say that it'll be a 4-year payback at most, but it'll be very low with something like this. Yes. Yes. Yep. So we will hold all the rest of the questions to the end. I appreciate that, but we will. So, okay, we can move on. So, with that, even though it reduces the cost by a lot, right? The upfront cost is still there. The grant for the REAP grant, they're not going to give you the money up front, okay? They want to see that you've actually done the project, right? And so that system that was going to cost $75,000 is still going to cost $75,000 to the business right up front. They have to pay for it immediately. And then once the project is completed, you send in proof that it's done, and then you start getting all of your rebates. Okay? So that $75,000 might still be a hurdle that people cannot get over. Like a small business might not have that kind of fluidity in order to spend that money right away. So one thing that can be done is by using the PACE program, which provides loans at reduced interest rates so that you can get your loan up front, and then you can pay for your system, and then once the rebates start coming in, you can pay off the loan. Okay, and so since it's a low interest rate, it adds a little bit back to the payback period, but it's not going to add more than probably a year or two. Okay, so next. All right, we are at questions. Yes, Carrie. Mm-hmm. Yes. So in terms of like local legislation, it really comes down to zoning laws and things like that. For instance, I don't think that there's going to be much in terms of Hudson, but like in Minneapolis, you can only go up so high with your roof, right? And if you put a solar panel on your roof, it might raise it above that sight line, okay? However, Hudson doesn't have that. So you're going to be okay if you're putting like solar on your roof in Hudson, okay? However, I will look into that further because I don't know all of the zoning laws in terms of Hudson. But that's essentially what it comes down to, is zoning. Yes?
Talked a lot about businesses. Let's just talk about residences.
Sure.
So let's say that you have a fairly tree residence, and so solar is not an option.
Right.
Talk a little bit about geothermal.
Yep.
How practical would that be? Do you have an idea?
Well, in terms of practicality, it's tough to say. It really depends on your site, but and I'm not an expert on geothermal systems. I'm just going to put that out there. That said, the geothermal systems also qualify for these programs, right? but not at a business level. So, for instance, if you put in a geothermal system at your house, you could apply for the federal ITC, that 30%. You'd also get a Focus on Energy grant. You might get a utility grant. Are you on Excel? Okay, so I'm not sure what Excel has for geothermal. Honestly, Excel hasn't been the best in terms of incentivizing customers to put in their own systems. They actually somewhat discourage it, unfortunately. But that said, you would be able to apply for Focus on Energy, and so I'm guessing that you're going to probably be able to like top out around 40% of your cost of your system, or as a residential, but minimum 30%, right? That's just your minimum at this point with the ITC. Yes, Chris.
What about someone looking to purchase electrical vehicle
Sure.
or even a hybrid?
Sure. So the nice part about the incentives for electric vehicles at this point is that they have increased the value for used electric vehicles. I have to look back at the numbers, but again, the links in the slideshow have links directly to electric vehicle incentives, and there are some stipulations in terms of manufacturers and where the vehicles are manufactured. They prefer them to be manufactured on the U.S. soil. But that said, yes, individuals can access EV credits and for used and new. The one thing that I'll say in Wisconsin, getting kind of back to Carrie's question about what can you do, right now, if you buy an electric vehicle, the registration for electric vehicles is what, $140, I think? Something like that, compared to like $50 for an internal combustion vehicle. That's because you're not paying taxes at the gas pump as much. And so Wisconsin is actually somewhat discouraging people from buying electric vehicles right now. So in terms of political action, that would be one thing that I would suggest that people contact their representatives about, and getting rid of that extra fee for licensing an electric vehicle. Yes?
So you talked about added incentives by the state of Wisconsin.
Yes.
Agriculture and business. How about
So Focus on Energy it doesn't really matter whether you're business or residential. There are incentives for renewable energy systems. There's also incentives for like heat pumps for your home. In fact, River Falls in particular is encouraging heat pumps right now, so they're spending.
I have one more, just out of curiosity. How is the allocation for states figured out? Is it per capita, or is it like climate?
Sure.
What about us in northern Wisconsin?
Right. So, as far as I know, no, I don't think so. No. There is more cash for disadvantaged areas, okay? And so northern Wisconsin does have some areas that are considered disadvantaged, right, because they're so rural. I'll have to check the map. I don't know that for sure, okay? So, but there are certain areas that fall within those areas, right? But in terms of the general pot of money and how it's divvied up, I haven't looked into that, so I can't really answer that question. Sorry.
So you said that there's residential tax credits,
Yes.
but not we only pay 16% of whatever the thing is.
Right.
So our tax structure is really, predatory against people opposed to corporations.
Well, I wouldn't say corporations, because it is small businesses, And so granted, the designation for small business is pretty large, but if we're talking about our community here, people in our community can benefit from this, right? And yes, it is tilted towards small businesses, again, because of the pandemic. They were looking to prop up small businesses that were going away, and we're leaving only corporations left, right? And so in order to get small businesses to be more stable, they were hopefully giving more incentives to small businesses, right? And unfortunately, I would love to say that it's equal opportunity and that residential is as equally as important to climate change as small businesses, but businesses use more electricity than residences do. And so the reason why the government did this was because the bang for the buck is greater at the business level than it is at the residential level. Yes, sir. Sure. Well, wind energy would apply to that solar example that I gave, with that only 16.6% of paying for your wind energy. All of those incentives would apply to wind energy as well. So if you are in a situation where you can get a windmill and it's efficient, do it. I'm for, because, you know, as a solar person, I also don't want people to cut down trees, right? That's not good for our environment. And so if you are better served by getting a wind system than getting a solar system, I say go get a wind system, you know, because that's more important. It's more important that we do what is right than what I benefit from as a business.
One thing that's clear from your presentation is that it's difficult to wade through all the things that are possible in our county. What resources are out there to help people wade through all that?
Sure. So the biggest resource I found in this process is the IRA guidebook. Okay. Now, that still has 119 programs, and I spent a whole day at my job going through each one of these programs and reading about all of them, and I know that not everybody has that amount of time, right? However, they do provide a good synopsis, okay? And so if you scan through that and you're like, oh, what's that about? You can find out if you can access that program within probably 2 to 5 minutes, right? And there are sections of that program or of that guidebook that just say who is eligible. And if you look down there and it doesn't say resident, then you don't need to look at it anymore. But if you want to be more involved and you want to make sure that your state is getting those those funding numbers, then you can say, oh, this is a state level thing. I'm going to call my state representative and make sure that they are accessing these funds, right? So, I've met a couple of them. Nice people. All right. So, we've got 30 seconds left. All of my resources are up here. Again, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Really, the bottom line is I want people to share this information, okay? And I think that our communities can benefit from all of this, all of the money that can come into our communities. And so I really just want to make sure that we're all aware of it and are accessing the funds. So please share this information. Please contact me. I will answer all your questions, and if I can't, I will find out for you. Okay? Thank you.